Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, KBOI listeners. This, as you have heard every Sunday at 7 a.m. for the many weeks, is again the Great Idaho Show. What is the Great Idaho Show? You've heard a lot of businesses being talked about. You've heard some state initiatives being talked about and some other things happening. But the Great Idaho Show is a motivation for me to talk about what is great about Idaho. It's got many different people associated. And today we're going to talk to somebody that's not just a business. We're going to talk to somebody that's got an important role here in Idaho. But before we get started today, I am terrible about our sponsors because that is me, the sponsor, Old Arms of Idaho. Old Arms of Idaho, they are your Western military and firearms historical specialist. If you've got something that you think is interesting, a curio, a relic, something of value, that is where you take it. We are studying more than just guns. Guns is a big subject in the world, but there's a lot of history around that, and we're in the West. We have a lot of military sense and the firearm itself. So give Old Arms of Idaho a call. If you're just curious about it, you'd like to sell it, transition it into the marketplace, or maybe you inherited 300 of Grandpa's lever-action rifles or something. Old Arms of Idaho is where you go, the 24-hour gun show. They are your ambassadors to America's heritage. Today is a great day for the Great Idaho Show because we're going to engage in a conversation that I think is a number one subject of life. If you don't have what I'm about to mention, life does not exist without water. Water is a big deal in Idaho. Water is a lot of livelihoods. We have a lot of farm and ranching needs. We just need to drink water out of our cups. Today, we are talking with Neil Shippy. Neil is the District 65 water manager here in Idaho. And what does it all mean to be a water manager? What are water rights? What are some things happening? Why is this conversation happening? Idaho is a steward to the headwaters of water that provides life to a lot of other places down the road. A lot of questions about that, but we're going to be talking to Neil. Neil, welcome to the studio today.
Oh, thank you, Dylan. I appreciate you inviting me in.
You betcha. Thank you for coming in, Neil. The reason that this is happening is my wife and I are both land stewards, forestry land stewards. Many years ago, we had purchased property in Idaho. We have forest land that we manage, and we have things to do with that as stewards, registered stewards. But what comes with property is often water rights. And in those water rights, it's been quite a discovery about the ins and the outs and the things that we must know. Lots of conversations between the Idaho Department of Water Resources, lots of conversations between our water manager. And Neil today is just sitting down with us to have a conversation ultimately about some things transpiring with water rights. Let me explain and set one ground rule right now. Today, as we talk to Neil, we're going to talk about Idaho District 65 because that's what he manages. We're going to stay in those boundaries. And this is not politics. It's really hard to have it not be politics because let me remind you all, I've said it many times. Why am I talking to a water manager? Well, if you own property in Idaho and you have water rights, then you will be associated to somebody that is in your world as a water manager. And there's some things transpiring in Idaho news about water rights. And I just wanted to have a conversation with Neil about a water rights owner and manager and the person that's in charge of that here in Idaho. So that's the stage, Neil. Welcome. Are you ready, my friend?
You bet.
Okay. Well, so let's get into it a little bit, Neil. How long have you been in the role in Idaho as a water manager?
Well, the proper term is water master, actually.
Or water master. Yes. Thank you.
But yeah, either way is fine. But let's see, I took over, my predecessor retired in the beginning of 22, and so I've been in the role since then. So, and before that, I managed an irrigation district and worked for another irrigation district in other roles, and so, yeah, not too long in the grand scheme of a lot of the people in the water world. Seems like every year at the Idaho Water Users Reward Ceremony, there's 30 and 40-year career people that are
Yeah.
retiring, and just amazing how long some of them have been in the water. But yeah, I've actually grew up. Of course, I'm a fourth generation Idahoan.
Yeah.
not a 3.5.
Oh,
I love that. That's
I've said that I'm 3.5. There's a reason for that. Someday somebody will ask me, but just so to clarify, the 3.5 came by way of Neil Shippy here, as we were having a conversation many months ago when we were dealing with fire here in Idaho, which is a big subject, and water. But thank you.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I grew up. My family did a lot of work for the farmers and land leveling and for flood irrigation, putting the concrete ditches at the head ends of the fields, and so I grew up in the dirt and the water, and then it, for a time, got into the construction and chased that for a while, and I actually became a electrical master electrician, actually.
Yeah.
And but then the lure of water and dirt came calling, and I went back, and so I love the realness of the water and watching the crops grow and feeling like I'm a part of that. I help with that, and so.
It's very tangible, the water thing. I mean, it's an element of life.
Yes.
There's a little funny in there. You went from electrical, master, and the combination of electrical and water from your child history. I think water and dirt goes better than water and electrical. So we're glad to have your service here in Idaho, good sir.
You bet.
So what does a district water manager do generally, or a water master, excuse me?
Well, it varies a little bit depending on the size of your district. A small one, they may be a very small position where they work like a ditch rider. They go out and make sure that, maybe they have 20 people in their district, and they make sure that the right priorities are receiving the water. The older priorities are receiving that water, if there's not enough to go around. And then the total volume that they're allotted to, so somebody can't be taking a lot more than they're supposed to.
Sure.
And so then you get up to the larger districts, and we're a very young district. 65 is. We've only been organized since about 1990.
Can you describe the municipalities that are involved in your district?
Yeah, we have. So the startup at the upper end is we got McCall.
Okay.
And Cascade, Donley, Lake Fork, come down through there, and then Horseshoe Bend, and clear down to Emmett, Fruitland, Payette, New Plymouth. We actually have a few. We have a few of the cities that actually draw water out the surface.
Okay, so you have cities participating in an owned water right.
Yes,
that correct. You are the manager of whether we're doing the right thing or the wrong thing.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. City of McCall, they pull right out of Payette Lake.
Okay.
And then they run it through their filter plant and put it out into their system. And so, then Horseshoe Bend also does that. And then Fruitland does part of their water that way.
Okay.
And Payette has explored the option. They just haven't spent the money on the millions that would take to build this plant that takes to filter that water and so on. But yeah, it's a really big deal for McCall as it's growing exponentially. And
oh yeah, it's good. No, so here's this first segment. We only have 40 minutes here. This is probably an 8-hour conversation, Idaho and water. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that's why we're sitting here. But the point of this first segment is to describe that we have an individual in Idaho that signs an oath to the Constitution, signs an oath to the Idaho Constitution about managing the law. We are dealing with somebody who is to stick to the law and establish that, no different than a sheriff of the people. It's like being a sheriff of the water. Very challenging thing. We have Mr. Shippy here today to kind of hopefully help describe what these things are happening, because Idaho and water are two things that you're going to hear in the news, I'm assuming quite a bit in our near future. And I think personally this individual has a tough challenge. The reason why this is coming out is I too am learning and having water rights and finding some challenges with such. And I'm very thankful that Neil would take the time to be with us. Imagine that. We have a single individual that is, I guess it's hard to say the word in charge, but has it been put in the role of managing water for some of the fastest growing municipalities in this entire area. Plus, you have the very important individuals out there within that district, small ranchers, neighborhoods, everything. And no pressure, Neil, but I think it's coming to you, my friend. We've got about 30 seconds here. So as we close, I'm going to do a good job, which I'm very poor at, which is mentioning our sponsors, Old Arms of Idaho, as we close the collectible firearms, Western and military specialist. This is Dylan Stalker, your 3.5 generation Idahoan, just trying to share what's happening in here in Idaho. From my perspective, if you're hearing these people on this program, it's because I've talked to them, I've engaged with them, and that's what's happening here in Idaho, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. Welcome back, KBOI listeners, 670 AM, 93.1 FM, the greatest and most powerful radio listening audience in Idaho, the Treasure Valley. Thank you for listening this morning at 7 a.m. on a Sunday. It's early, but just so you know, you can go and listen to this conversation any time at thegreatidahoshow.com. If you have somebody that you know that has water rights in Idaho, that's the subject today. We're talking to Neil Shippy, the District 65 Idaho Water Master. We're going to talk about a master of water. And so, Neil, we've got a tough subject coming up. You're working with it every day. You've been working with it for some time now, because I, as a water user, was very upset and reached out to you in an email very recently, just not believing what's happening. And you're the person been directed to be in charge, we'll say, under the constitutional oath, no pressure, but there is a fee for water maintenance coming up that a lot of people haven't been associated to. Can you describe that for me?
Yeah, so the assessment for a water district is in place to pay for the water master to do the management of the district.
Sure.
So, to start with, you deliver the water. So that takes coordinating with neighbors, possibly measuring water to make sure that the proper people are getting that correct amount. And then in the larger scheme, like in the larger districts, we work with the Department of Water Resources, and they have a accounting program, and which looks at all the rivers and have the amount of water that's running down the rivers.
Yeah. So
it keeps track of the natural flow, and then when that is exhausted, or at least there's not enough to go around, then they start using storage. But that's a major part of a water master's job, is to make sure the right people are getting the right water.
Sure. I mean, we have rights to a very, very descriptive and specific amount of water.
Right.
And then we're dealing with the challenge of, well, you've been described this amount of water, but we have a first in right state.
Correct.
There are many people that have their rights first over yours. Right. And when somebody is misusing their water, the challenge of Mr. Shippy is to come down and say, hey, this person below you has the right first. So very challenging, Neil. We've had to deal with that, you and I. We won't get too descriptive to call out locations or anything, but I'm speaking with you today because I've had the challenge myself in lieu of a fire. Right. And so what are you experiencing out there?
Well, we are expanding the administration of the district currently. Like I said, we're a pretty young district, but in the 90s when they first organized, they just took in the main sections of the river, the bigger users.
Sure.
And so what we found is, that was the bulk of the major water, let's say in the Payette, that was getting diverted.
Yeah.
But there was still a lot of smaller users that were diverting, and that was still harm to the senior users.
Sure.
And so we're working on bringing in all of the irrigation rights. There's certain
couple types of rights, right? There's domestic rights, irrigation rights, things like
stock
that.
water, manufacturing, mining. Yeah, there's a lot of different. The main ones that we administer are irrigation. That is the most common. We do have some domestic now. We do not administer small, like a single home domestic right. It's a lot like a domestic well,
sure,
where you can irrigate up to a half an acre and use it for potable if you want, And
Pretty
some
light
people say,
impact stuff in the grand scheme of the water game, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so we don't administer them. And so this, as I've worked on bringing in a lot of these really small users, that the assessment is upsetting to them. They're like, well, I just irrigate a few bushes in my yard or something, and I said, well, it sounds like you would fit better under a domestic water right than an irrigation right.
Okay.
Because I said, if it says irrigation, then I am going to administer you. I am going to charge you the assessment fee.
Sure.
And so that's been a lot of people have went in and gotten rid of the irrigation beneficial use and just went to a single home domestic. Now, if it becomes two homes, that's different.
Yeah, right. Are we just talking about personal benefit, or are we establishing some way of business, basically,
yeah.
right?
And I do have some domestic rights that feed subdivisions for their irrigation or whatever.
Yeah.
And I do administer those. But a single home domestic, I do not. And then we don't administer stock water either.
Okay.
It's not really very impactful as far as the natural flow. A lot of the stock waters are, back up in the headwaters and, back up in little ponds and stuff back in the draws. And so we don't administer that. Hard to measure how much a cow drinks, I guess. But
Well, so this is a conversation that's interesting because, Neil, you are a professional. You've been a professional since I've ever communicated you, even with me being an unruly private property rights person that believes in all that and my water rights and you can't come take my water and writing emails and been such a professional person. But what Neil is eloquently, lightly describing is that there are many water users that are on a smaller scale than the grand ag scale in his district that are now having to pay a fee annually to secure their water and utilize that water. And whether or not they're using it correctly or not, I'm sure that's a wide subject, but the basic concept of a right and paying for it, that's counterintuitive to just about anything you've ever heard about rights. Hey, I have civil rights, but you'll only get them this month if you pay the fee. Neil is the singular person in charge or responsible for managing the communication between cities, between individuals, landowners, and why this is transpiring. And the job of this today is to provide a good source of information to me, a person as a landowner and a water right holder that has had this experience and have been upset. I mean, I wrote my congressman, aggregate general, I wrote attorney general, I wrote everybody like, this is ridiculous. And then you have probably one of the nicest people you ever meet in your whole life, Neil Shippy here, trying to be the sheriff of water in Idaho. No pressure, Neil.
Yeah, thanks.
So that's a description of what's transpiring here, what this conversation is. But there's been a lot of questions and concerns about the maintenance fee. Mm-hmm. How do we navigate this, or what's common for people to come up with this?
Well, it's supposed to cover, like for instance, when I come out to your property to protect your water right from somebody else taking too much, or if there's not enough to go around, that you get, if you're a senior, you get that. That pays for that time.
Okay.
It pays for the time that we run the accounting program and all the measuring that I have to do to enter it into the accounting program, and it pays for billing, and it pays, for the office. It covers all of that stuff. Now, one thing that we're very fortunate in the Payette is we have quite a bit of storage water.
Okay.
And so that allows the junior users to be able to rent that water when their water right falls out of priority.
Let's describe that just a little bit, because I've been a part and parcel to experiencing that. It was a surprise to me.
Right.
My water rights exist in a creek with maybe 3 parties.
Right.
Right. And we're small, okay, ladies and gentlemen. This isn't some big water right thing, but it's important to what we do and the 3 other parties, one of which is the Forest Service for a public service that they provide. But you are out there establishing the fact that, hey, there's more water to go around, but if you want to pay for more than what you need, you're going to rent that water, because somebody way down the line, 100 miles away plus, actually has rights to that water in that tributary, right?
Right. So, yeah, within Water District 65's boundaries, which is most of the Payette Basin,
Yeah.
there is a few smaller districts, but yeah. So if your water right, even if say you're at the headwaters, if your water right is junior to somebody downstream,
Yeah.
When we hit the day of allocation, and the day of allocation is when the natural flow no longer supplies everybody that wants to use that
Oh
water.
my goodness, what a day.
Yeah. And in and the average day in the Payette is about July 9th.
Okay.
And so, and a lot of your water rights, some of the older water rights will continue to be in for a little longer. And then, we have some that are in the 1800s. Them typically don't fall out of priority.
Okay, so the concept to me, and we've got about 2 minutes here. I'm trying to be a good radio person for both of us.
Sure.
This is an important conversation. The concept comes out like you're picking winners and losers, right? And this is math. These are contracts that were established, up to 150 years ago or more, right, between Idaho State and other states in a legal practice under the Constitution. And Neil Shippy, the water master of this area, is just trying to administer this. Let's not get mad at this fellow. There's two kinds of people in the world. There's good people and bad people. I believe Neil is one of those good people, just trying to do a good job. I'm going to roll out to this next segment, okay? In this next segment, there might be a couple of harder conversations about what that really means for what you're administering, who you're going to be engaging with in this next year, 2, 3 years, while you're trying to establish a fee for your water rights that hasn't existed since they started. It's a surprise to people. Sure. So this is Dylan Stalker. I'm sitting with a 4th generation Idahoan who was born and raised in the water zone in the ag community, working with water rights, and now he's a water master of those water rights, District 65. This is the Great Idaho Show. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not about politics, okay? If you want to put the subject of water and a 50% question of is it politics or not, some people might guess that it is, and most of those people have water rights and don't like what's happening. That's what's happening with Mr. Shippy here today. And before we close out this segment again, this is all sponsored by Old Arms of Idaho. It's about historical firearms, historical Western items, and historical militaria. It's the history business. They are your ambassadors to America's heritage at oldarmsofidaho.com. Thank you, Neil. We'll be coming right here into this next segment. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. Again, this is Dylan Stalker, The Great Idaho Show, thegreatidahoshow.com, where you can listen anytime to all the conversations that we've had with many great people of Idaho. What is The Great Idaho Show? I am a 3.5 generation Idahoan that is out there experiencing Idaho for my entire life, and I'm literally just sharing with you most people that I've engaged with that I think is positive or having a positive impact, whether it's a business or whether it's an artist, whether it's just an interesting person, or whether we have somebody like our guest today that has a tough challenge as a person charged with a duty here in Idaho in the subject of water. Water is life. I mean, if you've got to pick one of the elements, there's earth and water and air. And I don't know, I think I'm picking water. That just feels cooler and nicer to me. The others are interesting, but we're sitting down with Neil Shippy here again, who is the District 65 water manager here in Idaho. And District 65 covers many municipalities that are really close to us. We've got McCall, Horseshoe Bend, Emmett. I believe Idaho City's in there, Neil.
Nope.
But
that's over the hill.
Over the hill.
But yeah, we do go clear up the Grand Jean.
Okay.
Yeah, that South Fork goes a long ways up there. So Loman.
Okay, so we're talking about the Payette, right? The basin, right? So, okay, that's an easier way to simplify it. Where does the Payette touch?
Right.
And we're getting back to, I'm re-describing a little bit for y'all that have just tuned in, but Idaho has some challenges with water. If I'm going to simplify, and Neil, at any time in this conversation as a water master, please correct me, okay?
Sure.
But Idaho's water rights are not being utilized as they were set up to be. There are people that are overusing, and there are people that There's challenges to it. And a water master is like, we got to fund this somehow. Neil doesn't work for free as much as he might because of how much that he loves water, but I don't know any that would 100%. And so we've got some kind of harder questions. The core subject here today is that very recently I had received this notice after years and years of having water rights. It said, here, pay this fee. And if you don't pay this fee, you're going to lose your right. And that's a hard concept for a constitutionalist and a person who has a patent deed that signed by Calvin Coolidge that says you get water rights in the deed. And then you have this wonderful gentleman named Neil Shippy coming around saying, well, yeah, it's true. That's Idaho law and that's the way it's going to be. So Neil, you're out there administering this acquisition of this fee today.
Right. Yeah. That's what pays for the administration of the district. I mean,
sure.
it without it, then there's no water master running around to protect your water right from somebody else, and vice versa, and on downstream. But it's a little tough on some people, but it's really important. I visited with a lot of different people in very small acreages and stuff up through Garden Valley. There was a lot of them I brought in this last year, and they were, it was quite a range of reaction. I had people that were saying, I have a water right, great.
Absolutely.
Sign me up. Where do I pay the bill?
Sure.
And then I had people that were like, oh, I didn't know how to water right, but I don't want it. And they just abandoned it.
Oh, my goodness. Could you imagine that?
Well, some of them are challenged with they don't have access to the stream.
Okay.
And maybe their neighbor won't allow them to have a right of way through their property.
Yeah.
Or, I've tried to find, work with several different ones, suggest working with their neighbors, possibly getting a community system put together so that they would have a right of way through the neighbor back to the stream. Because a lot of these properties were one at, maybe a farm at one time or something, and they've been split up into smaller lots, and so then there's the ones along the stream that have access, of course, and then the ones back from it don't. But I've tried to come up with solutions for them if they're interested in keeping it. It is a value to their property if they have access to water. That is one thing with a water right is you are supposed to be actually using it. It is a right
to use it or lose it thing, right?
Correct. You can now. Not too many people are going after water rights currently. I mean, but if somebody could, if they said, well, I know that neighbor hasn't used it for 5 years, I want that water right taken away from him.
Yeah.
And so there is that possibility, and so I try to coach people into trying to use their water. If they don't want to very much, at least do it every so often. Take a picture of the sprinkler running if that's what it takes. Make sure that there is proof that they are using their water, so somebody couldn't come take it away at some point for non-use. There's ways of putting it into the water supply bank for someone else to rent, possibly, but that costs you some money.
Yeah, it's like another administration fee of some sort, right?
Correct. Yeah. And then, and then some people don't want to have to pay the rent on water because a lot of the water rights in the smaller areas, the smaller properties, a lot of times are more junior, and so they would anything after the day of allocation, typically July 9th, say, they would have to rent that water. And so I suggest to those, I say, well, just irrigate before July, run it some.
Utilize it.
Yeah, utilize that water.
Sure.
And that's of course what we want is we want Idahoans to use their water in Idaho.
We want to keep it in Idaho, right? We want to use every ounce, every bit. Let's hydrate this ground. Let's store what we're legally able to store. Let's communicate with our Department of Water Resources. I have to say, when we acquired our properties many years ago, you find out you have water rights, and you're like, well, what does that actually mean? You have points of diversion, and you have first in right, and you have these things that are just terminologies that you end up using. I'm going to give a plug for the Idaho Department of Water Resources as I hate to use the word, a bureaucracy, but it's not, okay? My experience from the very first phone call to every single point has been some of the most helpful and genuinely good folks trying to help you obtain your goal as it relates to your water within some of the oldest law in any state, which is which is water law.
Correct.
It's really challenging.
Yeah. That's a great group of people over there. Yeah, they do a great job. That's my support. They're they help the water masters and then I work with them in the accounting portion of it too. And so, but now one thing I should mention too is with these assessments are set at our annual meeting, and that typically is in Emmett. Okay. We've been having it at the Nazarene Church in Emmett for the last several years. And every water right holder, if they get this invoice, they should be getting an invitation ahead of time. Of course, a lot of water rights aren't in the correct names. We're trying to clean that up too. But they have the right to come and vote on all the resolutions, all the how we govern that water district. How there's certain water laws that we have to follow. Yeah. But then there's resolutions, and part of those resolutions, set the minimum assessment and the assessment per acre foot diverted for the large, like the canal companies and irrigation districts.
These people that are doing 40,000 gallons a minute or something, right? Yeah.
Well, and they also elect me as the water master every year.
Oh, you go through an election process like the sheriff of Waterham.
Yeah, it's every... Yep.
We won't put that. Sorry, I take that out. Scratch that. Okay? We're talking about a good sheriff, not one in relation to that. But in Idaho and water, that's a pretty big subject.
Yeah. So, but so I would encourage anybody that wants to be a part of this, wants to have their voice heard, show up and express their concerns. And typically, it's been the larger canal companies and irrigation districts, the larger users that show up at the meetings. The littler users don't as much. But like I tell them, the small users, there's no better way than to show up and have your voice heard. I said, these are good people, but they may not understand your concern. If you show up and express it, that's apt to sway their decisions on some of this stuff.
They might not have heard that concern or even had a concept of it, right?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
I think that, go ahead.
We're a very large water district. I mean, we have, been mostly governed by the ones down in the Emmett to Payette Valley down in there, down that area. But we stretch clear to McCall, clear up to Grand Jean, and so there's a lot of water users that, that if I encourage them to show up and express your concerns and like I said, they're good people, and if you want to be a part, show up and vote. And
so. Everything generally can relate to like some basic statements, right? Like knowledge is power. Right. Water is powerful. My experience with you is what I love. Your motivation is you have, I think, a motivation and a boundary for Idaho. And there's two kinds of, I don't want to use the word bureaucracy because that puts a bad name on the Idaho Department of Water Resources and their water masters. But in those senses of a state-run facility, if you will, there's two concepts, and I think that Idaho has the right concept. You can screen people out of that process and be like, oh, nope, sorry, you didn't sign here correctly. You're out and you're going to lose your right. And then just assimilate all this stuff. Or there's what I genuinely believe, and I don't believe, I know, I've experienced it directly with you, is we screen people in. You're out there very helpfully participating in an interview which could be a giant trap. Yeah. It's not like we had a script or anything that we're following. You are a person that has a job, a role, and a tough one at that is just trying to be out there being like, hey, you have a water right. We should capitalize on this. These are the legitimate and legal ways that you can do this, and I'm right here to help you. You bet. I think you've expressed that many times through me and my troubles. My wife and I went through one of the fires last year, and next thing you know, one of our little water right scenarios started dripping no water, and you find out that something's happening up above that, we'll leave it right there. And then Mr. Shippy has to show up and start being like, this is going to be the way it's be, and be a sheriff of that. And when you're talking fire and life protection and your property protection, things can get pretty challenging. You have quite a few challenges on a daily basis, I'm sure, Neil.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that was a first for me on the with with the fire situation there. So that was interesting.
Okay.
The firefighters were great to work with. I thought they were trying to work really hard to save your properties, and they did a great job. So, but yeah, most of my situations are more just people, and they're working with their neighbors to try to make sure
knowledge
they're getting
and stuff,
proper amount of water. And,
yeah,
and so there's a lot of things. One thing I would mention, the water rights. A lot of the water rights are in the wrong names. They're in the names of maybe 2 owners back, 3 owners back. Maybe haven't been changed.
They didn't administer the correct administrative document to change that, which would normally happen in a real estate transaction, right?
Right. Yeah. It's not something people understand. They say, well, you got a water right, but it's not explained very well that they need to fill out a form and they need to get that over to the department. I am talking with my advisory committee about possibly doing something different next year, and actually working with some of the other water districts, possibly seeing if we can't come up with a solution for that and try to help them when a property sells, that we can help them to try to get that, make sure the name gets changed. And, they get the form for the transfer into their name, and
that's better for them.
Absolutely.
Right? They're being officially legitimate water owners. Right. And then that's better for you as administrators that are able to communicate with the people that are associated to this very important number, which is usually like 46-18257, something like that. Yeah. There's some real things happening there.
Right.
I'd love to hear that. So we've got another segment. We've got about 10 seconds left here. When we come into this next segment, there's some things moving forward for Neil, and I'm openly, as a water user, just trying to help out the district and get some communication out there. So we'll be right back. Okay, everybody. Welcome back. Again, this is Dylan Stalker, your 3.5 generation Idahoan. This is the Great Idaho Show. The Great Idaho Show has a motivation for me, a person who's been in Idaho my entire life or associated with many family members beyond myself. What is great about Idaho and the wonderful things that we have happening here? Not all of it is just easy. We're talking about water. We're talking about livelihoods here. There are people in Idaho like Neil Shippy, who I'm sitting with, the District 65 water manager, in some of the fastest growing communities in our local area. They may be small today, but they're moving quick, and there's water associated in cities and big users and small users and all this thing. And you have this one single individual of his district that is established by an oath to the Constitution, an oath to the Idaho Constitution, to manage this to law. There's some difficult thoughts in there. And how do you be just a nice, positive, motivated person with the idea and aspects of the law in Idaho and water and talk to all of these different individuals? That is what Neil Shippy is doing here for District 65. Neil, this final segment, what's the future looking like here for you? You've got quite a task, my friend. You're bringing people on to an administered water system where money becomes involved. What's happening?
Right. Well, yeah, it's definitely a necessary thing.
Sure.
That's one thing about water rights is, there needs to be usage. There needs to be usage of that water right for it to be a viable right.
Sure.
And so by bringing them into administration, we will account for that water. Depending on the size of it, it may be in a collective manner with a group of water users, or the larger ones will maybe be accounted by themselves. But we will be accounting for that water.
Yeah.
And therefore it's a protection for that water right too. And so, and we want to understand the best, to the best that we can of how much water is actually being utilized and what's available as the developments grow and all that. And so, there's a lot to it, and it's really an important piece is to get these water rights cleaned up and in the correct owners' names.
Yep.
And if they choose to keep it, and so.
And you might discover people that are just like, I don't need that.
Yeah,
I've got a well and I've got like, a 10 by 10 foot piece of grass and let the water go.
absolutely. Yeah, I've had.
That's a benefit to the people who want to use water. It might put the date from July 9th to July 9.5 or July 10th or something, but
yeah. There's a lot of. I've had several that just abandoned because they didn't have access to the stream.
oh, that's correct.
Or
Yeah.
and then they could irrigate up to their half acre with their domestic well and so on. And so, it's just it's different for everybody, and they need to figure out what works best for them. I try to give them the different options, and maybe try to give them something that would work best for them. And but yeah, we're growing exponentially.
And quick.
When I started, we had about 177 invoices. I think we put out this year. I sent out about 360.
Okay.
Next year, I'm looking to probably double that.
Yeah, we're growing to 700, 750.
Yeah, and then before we're all said and done, we're probably going to be in the 1,500 range. And so, there's just a lot of customers that we need to coordinate with and make sure that their water rights are being protected and utilized correctly. And it's a big lift, but I will eventually need help as we grow. I mean,
Yeah.
actually, it was a one-man show, and and I was doing everything when I first started, as my predecessor did. But now I have a part-time secretary, and I
Yeah.
have a part-time water master who actually just recently retired from the department of 36 years, the Department of Water Resources.
Has a deep knowledge of it, sounds like.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And so he's going to handle a lot of my work up in the Valley County area. And so, but yeah, as we grow and we're going to have to try to get out there and solve people's problems and do the best we can for them. And as far as communication, we talked about that a little bit.
Yeah.
We was actually discussing this last night at one of my advisory committee meetings. We were talking about a website, social media, that type of stuff, and that's why I really appreciate you inviting me in is to help get this word out. And we're not trying to be the bad guy. We're just trying to follow the law and make sure everybody's accounted for and protected. And so, but we definitely are going to try to do a better job of communication. That's one thing we kind of failed a little bit at, shall we say, on some of this, and part of it is because a lot of these water rights aren't in the correct name or address.
Yeah.
Because if they are, then you get notice, for the annual meeting, the department sends out the notices for the annual meeting, and they will send it out to whoever that water right is addressed to, and it may have been somebody from 3 decades ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it's it's great if people can get right on it, and some people are great about doing that. They get right on their water rights and get it in their name, and so there's some work that the people need to do too. There's some responsibility on their side to protect their water right too, and so.
Yeah, I mean, it's what I genuinely appreciate about the language and what I've experienced of you. It's like you are also just supporting and helping the people that had no idea what great opportunity that they might have in this, right?
Sure.
Hey, maybe you can't use it today, but if you just did a little work this way and worked with your neighbor, hey, you get to utilize the water right. This radio station, the KBOI station, 670 AM, 93.1 FM, covers such a wide range of individuals, and a lot of them are on city water. And for the amount of fees that you pay to have a water right against your $200 monthly bill just to put grass on the ground, to me, if you ask me, here in Idaho Water, it should be a celebration.
You bet.
If you have it, you should celebrate it. And Neil is just quite simply trying to help you celebrate it within the boundaries of laws that have existed before the state of Idaho was incorporated almost. Right? Like these laws are from the 1870s or the 1830s, and we didn't incorporate until 1890.
Yeah. I think my oldest right is in 1866.
Man.
Yeah. And I think they kind of figured, somebody had told me how they had proven those was maybe it had to do with mining, or possibly, growing vegetables for their mining operation or something.
Feeding the people of the mine or something like that, right?
Exactly, yeah. So, yeah, there's some really old rights out there. But
it's a great and wonderful benefit to have them. I would encourage everybody, if you have one, I mean, don't give it up. Try to talk to your neighbors. You think it's a burden, but for the actual value of what that is, to keep somebody who is, we're not, the Idaho Department of Water Resources is not out profiteering on your very small fee to have your water right. Take some steps. Talk to Neil. Be respectful and just understand that he's trying to help you. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Neil, we're trying to keep this water in Idaho.
Absolutely.
That's a core motivation right there.
You bet. Yeah, utilize as most the most of it we can in Idaho. That's correct. Yes, there is. There will be some that leaves the state, but yeah, let's use as much as we can in Idaho and make Idaho that much greater of a place.
Man, it's so beautiful already. And I was confused about the water. I was imagining like Idaho was this great supplier of water to the rest of the world. What our contracts are as a state to other states and stuff like that. But comparative to Oregon and Washington, we're, as you clarified, quite small in the water game as a state, right?
Oh, yeah. We don't really have contracts with other states for water, but we do have an agreement with the Nez Perce for some of the salmon flush.
Yeah.
But that's just a willing buyer, willing seller type of a deal. And so if there's extra of storage, then some of that can be rented for that purpose, and which really helps out the entities that own that storage, right? Because it's water they were not needing anyways, and that extra revenue really helps. And a lot of this aging infrastructure is really getting to be an issue because some of it's it's 80 to 120 years old, and so a lot of this stuff needs to be updated. And so
we got about a minute and a half left. Real quick, Neil, you mentioned maybe doing some town halls and some local public information. Is there anything on the docket right now?
No, we don't have anything yet. I have mentioned it to the department, the guys that work with me and help out support the water districts, and we are in talks about it and looking at what may be the best for us. Well,
I would say this. We're talking about the communities very close to here in the Treasure Valley, District 65, basically the Payette River, right, and the forks of that. And if you know somebody or you're curious, you yourself are listening, you all can hear this from the KBOI signal, inquire and just know that the motivation is positive for the state as a whole, you as an individual. And if we all just respect the way it was designed, there's going to be plenty for everybody to utilize and have and to share. And just, some people got earlier rights than others, and that's just the law. We're going to respect that. Neil, thank you for coming on the show today. I'll close out. This is Dylan Stalker, your 3.5 Generation Idaho, talking with Neil Shippy, the District 65 water manager here in Idaho. He's got a tough challenge to onboard some great customers of that district. And I wish you all the best, Neil. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you, sir.